This is Basket Case Clubs, CPR Group's podcast where we turn basket case clubs into showcase clubs. G'day everyone and welcome back to Basket Case Clubs, our little podcast where we like talking about things that go wrong and, more excitingly then, what clubs can do, and more importantly, the volunteers within those clubs can do to help those wrong things turn right again. My name's Michael Connolly and I shall be your host on this little journey through some relationship building goodness, and joining me as usual is my brother and partner in crime, Steve Connolly. G'day Steve, how you doing?
Hey, we ain't little, man. You just said, this is our little podcast. We're huge. We've got so many listeners. We're blowing up the world, man. No, I'm really well. Thank you. And it's that thought came to mind because only yesterday we were talking with one of our good partners at a state sporting organisation who had shared with us that he'd been listening to the latest couple of episodes of the podcast on his way into work yesterday. So it was a good reminder that people out there are really enjoying the ramblings of Michael and Steve.
yeah, but he did also share with us a little moment of self-awareness that he had, that he said, why am I sitting in the car on my way to work listening to stories about club governance? Like, oh my God, I'm a nerd too. Yes, we love nerds.
But it's good for people who listen to the podcast to know that they're not in this on their own, that there are plenty of others out there struggling with very similar challenges, and you need not struggle through those without the support of your peers and other volunteers in your club, or even from us.
And therefore, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You can rely on other people who've been through exactly the same problems that you may be facing to help come up with a solution for yourself, which, interestingly, is exactly the topic that I'd like to go through today. Too many groups think that they are the first ones to be struggling with a problem, only to find that as soon as they start talking to somebody else, and it might be somebody from a completely different sort of organization, so that might be another sport, or it might even be a non-sporting group altogether, or it might be somebody who's faced a similar situation in a workplace setting as well, and go, oh, that's pretty much exactly the same as the sorts of challenges that we face here. Now, Steve, for your benefit, it's really interesting how often it happens that I'll be talking to someone who makes the fatal mistake in talking to me at a party and says, so Michael, what do you do? Right. And then
sometimes to which I just answer, I'm an accountant.
Yeah. No, it's too much fun to tell the truth. To talk about the pain points that people struggle with when they're in a volunteer setting, but in a setting where they're working together with people. And so often it happens and people say, oh my God, so you deal with that sort of stuff at club level. We have exactly the sorts of troubles at work. We struggle to have good communication. We struggle to keep everyone on the same page. We struggle to look for and implement solutions that other people have found and then implemented to make our problems go away. But as soon as we talk to people, those sorts of things open up. So that's the purpose of this discussion, is to encourage everyone to find ways to build really good partnerships and to join existing networks of other like-minded people who may have been through exactly what you're going through here. It's so often that the challenges that are faced by one group today have already been identified and solved by other people. So rather than reinvent the wheel every time that you come up with a new challenge, you are far better off looking for opportunities to establish really good partnerships with other organizations, with councils, with peak bodies. And that could be your peak body in your sport, but it could also be other peak bodies as well, and join other networks to uncover the potential efficiencies that you can use to strengthen your networks and how you then deliver your services. So it's funny though, in talking about building partnerships, and then a network is really a series of partnerships. So the way that a network works, and you look at the term social networking, it's that you have friends and you have contacts that I'm not connected to. But if my messaging is interesting enough to you, then by you sharing my messaging among your networks, I have reach to people that I could otherwise not have had any reach to at all. So the sorts of so that obviously is the way that social media works, but it also works outside of that realm. So the sorts of networks that I'm talking about here are indeed the peak bodies themselves. Take an association, a regional association. Now, sure, you could look at that regional association as a service deliverer. This is a competition administrator and a membership manager. But you could also look at it as a network of clubs. So what one club finds and resolves can be shared among all of the clubs in that network/association. But building partnerships, building networks, and being an effective engager of other humans is all about your ability to build good relationships. So while I don't want to go too deep into relationship building discussions straight away, I do want to touch on why you might want to build good relationships and establish partnerships with different sorts of organizations.
Just quickly, I'll jump in there because something that came to mind as you were talking there is that a lot of the people with whom we work are social beings. They're people who stick their hand up to volunteer. They are presidents, secretaries, treasurers, other board or committee members, or active volunteers within their organization. Otherwise, we're not typically dealing with those people in clubs. It's the active volunteers that we deal with. So these people are generally people who have a natural tendency to socialize with others. So they're with others, not always. And some people are very happy to help out as long as they don't have to engage with other people. So it's probably important.
I'm happy to help. Just don't make me talk to anyone.
That's right. Maybe to write grants late at night, comfort of my couch
own,
or from home. Yeah. And be in my own little bubble.
It reminds me of the old saying, this job would be great if it wasn't for the bloody customers.
I've heard clubs say things like that.
Yeah, this club would be fantastic if it wasn't for these stupid members.
We didn't have to do what they say. So I think it's important to recognize, and I think it was last week or the week before that we touched on this, that not everyone is going to need to play this role in an organization. So it's important to recognize that some people, whether that be by virtue of your position, i.e. president, that is typically the schmoozer and spokesperson of the organization, are going to fill this type of role, but other people are not going to necessarily need to do that because there are other jobs that are just as important at both the strategic and operational level within clubs. So that's just an important precursor that some people might be listening to this and think, oh gosh, I could never go and be the one to drive this partnership creation. And that's okay as long as the organization has this as a focus and it has the right people in the role.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Really, really good point. We'll come back to that one. So the reasons that you might want to establish a partnership, but maybe as simple as, hey, we're going for a grant. And we actually need to not just look at the grant agency as an adversary here, but we could look at the grant agency as an ally. And if you are prepared early enough, so I had a discussion yesterday with a group who's preparing for a grant application 6 weeks out. Now that's
awesome.
That's not common, but because we've got that much time, they've been able to establish a relationship with the funding agency to say, hey, we really need to understand the parameters of the funding here and what's available and how we need to make sure that we frame our project correctly to they've already got a great project, but make sure that the wording in the application is correctly framed. And they've got time to do that because they've built a relationship with the grant agency. It might be that your lease renewal is up. And if you've got an adversarial relationship with the people at council who are there to help you, but you're not seeing them like that, you're seeing them more as policy enforcers or compliance officers, then you're going to struggle to be able to come up with mutually beneficial agreements between you. So it's like that for everything. But even getting new members, there's a partnership there. To go back to the grants, if we're forming partnerships and we're saying, well, we're going to do this project, but it's going to benefit others within our community, establish a partnership with those others within our community and don't just do it on paper and say, well, if we get this mower, we're going to share it with the cricket club down the road. Actually go and establish a partnership with that cricket club down the road because it's more than just about sharing mowers, isn't it? It might be about sharing other resources. Hey, we've got a gym that we could share our gym. They've got access to they've got access to some great people, some remedial massage, some sports physios that we can have access to because then our partnership or our network has access to those people. So let's get into a discussion then about how you might establish a partnership. The most important thing about before you launch into a partnership is self-awareness. Now, we obviously talk about this quite a bit, Steve, in understanding your purpose or your why. But before you go and start to look for those cricket club down the road, just to continue that example, make sure that you're clear on your own purpose. What is it that we are trying to achieve? What sort of an organization are we? For instance, if we are the sort of organization that is the strong base of the pyramid type organization, so our focus on membership recruitment is building a really strong junior base so that we've then got the ability to have more, to be able to have more people in our sport. They might not be in our club. So we might not be that elite club, but we are creating the base of the pyramid. That's what sort of club we are. So when somebody says, oh, hey, I'm going to another club because there's better opportunities, they say, great, we've done our job in giving you a love and a passion for this sport. Go forth and become elite. Or at the other end of the spectrum, are we an elite club? Because just by understanding that, you might be able to, you definitely will be able to have a clearer understanding of the sort of other clubs that you might want to establish a partnership with. So if you are that base of the pyramid type club, then a partnership with an elite club makes perfect sense, because we can be the feeder club. There's a terminology that no doubt you've heard and used before.
Yeah, I love that idea too, that we're all in this together. All too often, we
haven't heard that at all over the last 2 years, have we?
Don't say the C word.
He's talking about COVID.
Gosh, no, I've completely lost my train of thought. No, what we see too often is two clubs in that sort of situation where one, realistically, if they were honest with themselves, would recognize that they're a feeder club. And when we say bottom of the pyramid, that doesn't mean less important than any other organization.
It's the foundation. Yeah.
It's the foundation. You're building that love of the game. And if that means that those participants who get to the age or level of skill that means they progress beyond your organization, that's okay. You've done your job. But all too often we see clubs, again, to use that term that you've mentioned a couple of times, they see nearby clubs as in an adversarial way, rather than saying, all right, well, let's create those partnerships with the clubs, because it's likely that people who belong more at our club might, in the first instance, go to them, and they can send people back to us as well. So this doesn't need to be a one-way flow of participants. Yeah. And those opportunities, because over the course of many years, clubs have just established this idea, or volunteers in clubs have established this idea in their head, that we're in this on our own and we've got to do our best to get the most members here, and we don't care about any other nearby club. That's in reality likely holding both, or all of those clubs in the nearby area back.
It's funny that, just picking up on something else that you said there, it was only this morning that I was having a discussion with another SSO, and in that discussion it came up that the big clubs, the elite clubs, they have a high level of self-awareness, and that's because in this sport there's typically a fair bit of money in those clubs because of their connection to licensed clubs as well. But they know then how to apply those resources to make sure that they've got a great club as part of a network. So while the barriers between those elite level clubs are being broken down, because if they understand that as a network we are stronger in our advocacy role to council, advocacy work to our council or our region, so the region of councils in our area, they also understand that if the little clubs, those foundation level clubs, aren't also strong, then it has a direct and demonstrable impact on their membership base. Because if we can't call on the members from those feeder clubs, that the people might not have, there's a barrier to people participating straight in the elite level clubs straight away. And that might be a perception that it's going to cost us more money, a perception that we're not good enough yet, or it might simply be that we don't want to travel yet. But if they get into those small clubs and they build a passion for the sport, then they stay. And that's all you got to give kids. You don't need to give them all of the skills at 8, 9, and 10. That if they love it, they will have the passion to put in the time that it takes to develop the skills over the next few years and do their time. And ideally, the pointy end of the pyramid means that the young adults who get to that level have put in their 10,000 hours and they've become masters at their trade by the time then they're moving into professional sport. So when you are looking for the sorts of partnerships to build, be clear on your own purpose, but then you can start to be clear on the purpose of the partnership. So if we know what strengths we've got that we want to complement by establishing a partnership with somebody else, then it gives the partnership its own purpose. If we know that there are gaps in operation that we don't, as you say, we don't want to go this alone, then we can establish a partnership that helps us to fill those gaps. But like we said, it's always important to understand the why that sits behind it to begin with.
Yeah.
All right. So now you get into the discussions about a partnership, and it's critical that you have discussions at all levels and get buy-in from all levels within each organization. So, Steve, I won't mention the sport, but do you know some sports where there are typical situations where there used to be a club that then became two clubs because the seniors and juniors bloody hated each other and they ripped apart from each other?
You must be talking about rugby league.
Maybe, yeah, but there will be people listening
it happens in other sports.
That's my sport. Yes, it does happen in other sports. We've just been dealing with some recent examples where if you don't get buy-in from the top's critical, unless you've got the two committees on either side saying this is right. Yes, we understand the efficiencies that we can gain. Yes, we can understand that the economies of scale, the economies of scope that we can build by a better partnership between us.
Yep.
But if it gets scuttled because you've got the white hanters at the membership level, at the participation level, at the parent level underneath that, then the whole thing can get blown out of the water.
Yep, absolutely. And it's so common. It's so common that is people who were involved in one of those clubs' establishment or, involved very early on in the life cycle of the club that often lose sight of what the club's all about today. Things change, but modern businesses need to adapt to the world around them and to their operating environment. And all too often, because of the nature of clubs that are led by volunteers elected by the broader membership, those people who come into a position, typically, as we've talked about several times in the past, will continue to do things and continue to have a very similar mindset to their predecessors. So it can be difficult to think differently and to break through that that mindset that we need to. We don't like the juniors because we've never liked the juniors, and vice versa. Whereas often when you look,
we don't like the seniors because we put all the money in and we spend all of our volunteer time in, and they get paid to play their sport. They just drink piss every weekend.
That's right, and don't pay their fees.
Yeah.
So it's important, as you say, to I think to determine exactly what it is that you want to get out of the partnership. It's also really important to recognize that some organizations aren't suited to partner. And within the sport of rugby league, which you mentioned, we've got some recent examples but also in other sports, some organizations for really, well-founded reasons and others for kind of more unreasonable reasons, not ready to partner. And that call needs to be made early as well, because otherwise it can be a big pain in the ass for lots of people and a distraction.
A massive investment of time for very little return on that investment. Yeah. This is actually a really good point to segue into the next topic, which is the culture. So when we understand our purpose and we've got our value statements that aren't just words like integrity and respect and honesty, because seriously, if you're not acting with integrity and you're not respecting integrity, and you're not acting with transparency, I mixed up my integrity and my transparency. If you're not acting with transparency as it is, and you've got to write that as a word of a value, then what sort of organization have you been for the last freaking 2 decades? But value statements that are how we live that and how we connect with our members, and they're feeling words used in those sorts of values. When you understand that about yourself, you can then understand what sort of culture you're looking for in your potential partner organizations. Again, so while value statements, vision statements, and mission statements are a really good indicator of a potential fit for a partnership with another organization, and this can be reaching up, so an organization, a partnership with an organization that sits above you hierarchically, so government, a larger NGO, a peak body, or a peer, then obviously you can look for those as indicators to their culture, but real culture is how they behave in line with those statements and those words. If you can see that there's a potential, like you said, it might be at this point that you say, well, look, I don't like how they're always turning up late to meetings. I don't like how a couple of members of the committee tend to focus more on this as a chance to socialize at the bar than to spend the time that we've got together to really progress opportunities for better community development. Then, maybe we're not better off going it alone, but maybe we're better off finding a better fit culturally.
Yeah.
Because with culture, It's kind of like, and we've had this discussion before, it's kind of like when you're hiring from an employment perspective, the particulars of the relationship so how we're going to work on a policy basis, how we're going to communicate, so communication protocols, those are technicalities that are fairly easy to resolve because you just write it down. They're the sorts of things that you can write down and they're logical. The cultural commitment or the cultural alignment of two organizations is more like when you just know you're entering a new relationship with a partner, you're entering a new relationship, employee-employer relationship. You can tell the people who've got what it takes, the attitude, the drive, the passion to achieve. And that's what you're looking for in a potential partner as well. So that all falls, I think, under culture. Then we get into money. So on the money side, typically the sorts of partnerships that we're talking about in community sport don't cost money. But if there is an investment that you need to make, then obviously look for what the return on that investment will be. So if there's a financial outlay for establishing a partnership, I don't know, it might be through an event. And like I said, it's not necessary that there will be any financial outlay, but what's the return on that investment? Will that be a financial return? Will we make more money because of the partnership? Or will we save time because of the partnership? Or will the partnership open up more opportunities that we hadn't yet had access to? So those are the sorts of things to look for when you're looking for a return on investment. But on the flip side of the finance, even though finances won't necessarily come into play, it's important to look at the opportunities, the financial opportunities that a potential partnership can bring. So can we, just because we're partnerships, run this event together, which then puts money into our kitty, or we're not necessarily running it for money, we're running it for brand awareness and for organizational awareness. By having a partnership, will we achieve some of those economies of scale and economies of scope that we talked about? Because instead of having, for the rugby league clubs, for instance, that may be considering amalgamation, are we then able to move from this pulling apart and having two lots of accounts and two lots of insurances and two lots of committees to be able to say, well, all right, if we pool our resources, then we can redeploy. That we're not going to actually save any money or time, but the money and time that we're no longer spending on waste is redeployed to where it should be being spent. So more strategic outcomes for both organizations. And then to finish, like I said, we'd come back to this, it's the right person or the right people. Yeah. So, Steve, we talk about the roadblock thinking, the three that are variations on the same theme. Oh, we do it like that because that's how we've always done. I think Basket Case Club started with that little theme, didn't it? And if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Leave well enough alone. If it's good, it's good enough. Yeah, I don't like. They're so stagnatory. Those sorts of comments. Hence why I call them roadblock thinking. But it's the one in the middle. Oh, Michael, yeah, we tried that once. Didn't work. Like, seriously, did you stop and think that maybe it wasn't what you tried, but who you put in charge? So just like you said, there might be people with great skills that, because you've got this little partnership on your own committee that identifies the strengths of the individual and then bolsters them with strengths of other individuals to create a great team, which is why we call what we do committee coaching so often, because it's all about building a great team and working on things and practicing things that make you a stronger team together. So having the right person to guide and to build these sorts of partnerships is really important. And yes, it's going to be a people person, but it's also going to be someone who has a good degree of self-awareness internally of their own strengths and their own personality traits, but also self-awareness of your organization. So this is a person who's going to understand your organization's purpose and the intended purpose of a partnership at the foundational level. That they will understand it at an emotional level.
Importantly, then, leaving the people who are not the right people to do this stuff to do the other stuff.
So that redeployment of resources.
Yeah, that's right. So we're not overburdening then the people who need to go and do the schmoozing and then come back and keep the ship steadied.
Don't overburden your people because they need to do the schmoozing. There you go. There's a takeaway for you.
Good.
All right. So if we had to summarize everything that we've just been through, I reckon that we could put it down to 3 points. The first one is consider your partnerships based on the benefit that they're going to provide. So enter into partnerships that are going to provide benefits to both parties. Now, obviously, a low-hanging fruit type of partnership that sports clubs in particular are looking for is sponsors. A sponsorship arrangement is a partnership. Now, if that sponsorship arrangement is going to put a logo on a jersey, a sign on a fence, and a logo on a website, how's that actually going to benefit the sponsor? What's it designed to do? How does that drive behavior for the sponsor to make money, to get a return on their investment in your sponsorship, not just feeling nice through a donation?
Yeah, sponsorship's a really interesting one in the context of this discussion because in my experience, it's really common for clubs and their volunteers to see sponsorship as really a one-way business arrangement. And they'll even lump sponsorship in with grants, for instance.
They're so
and
different.
fundraising. And they're so different. If we think about grants and fundraising and sponsorship all together, it's all about getting money to benefit us.
Yeah.
Sponsorship, more reasonably, again, as we've discussed in the past, is better suited to be coupled with something like marketing, because you do marketing for yourself. And if you're doing sponsorship acknowledgement right, you're doing marketing for your sponsors.
Yep.
And sponsorship is a taxable supply. So realistically, sponsors need to get value from the partnership. And it's up to you to ensure that you're delivering on that in the interest of having them come back and partnering with you in the following year.
The information provided by Steve Connolly is general in nature. Please take your own accounting advice before acting on any sponsorship, taxation, something like that.
T's and C's apply. That's why they started saying T's and C's apply. It's far quicker than everything you just did.
Oh, the wheels fell off at the end anyway. That was going to be really funny if I'd been able to make it through to the end. All right. So the next one then is remember the aims of the partnership. So yes, enter the partnership only if it's beneficial to both parties. Also remember that you have your own purpose and the partnership then has a purpose as well. They obviously need to be very closely aligned. And the more you understand those, even to the point of being able to write it down, even if it's only on the back of a cocktail napkin, but to be able to write it down so that it's so clear that your entire committee or committees of both partners understand the aims of each organization, the cultural fit, and the aims of the partnership itself. And finally, to go back to our planes crashing, Steve, communicate. When you have a partnership at any level, make sure that the communication is really, really open and talk about things nice and early. Small things that are aired can be resolved without much pain. Small things that aren't then can fester and become big things and derail entire partnerships and even put the longevity of organizations at risk. So communicate.
That's so true. We've been talking quite a bit about partnerships between organizations. Other types of partnerships that have come to mind during the discussion have been things like clubs and schools. And for so long, as long as we've been doing this work, we've heard government harp on about the need for better co-use between school and community in terms of participation space. And we see school playing fields heavily used during school hours and sit dormant outside of school hours. On the contrary, we see community sporting space sit dormant during school hours and, ramp up after school and on the weekends. So the clubs and schools that have effectively partnered have helped to remove some of that duplication and provide great services for their students and members. So that's a partnership that we're seeing more and more, and we're working on a couple of projects now where there's some really positive working partnerships that are being established between community sport organizations and schools. And the other one, which again absolutely ties in with those key takeaways that you've just talked through, is engagement with your politicians, the elected representatives in your area, local, state and federal pollies. We've talked in the past about the importance of engaging with them and getting them on side. And what do they want? They want kudos. They want public
ribbons to cut, babies to kiss,
and they want to be re-elected. Yeah. So let's be honest about that, and let's talk frankly about how you can meet their needs and they can help to meet yours.
Yep, and especially coming to election time, which we're getting there. You've got two partnerships that you need to make in a two-party preferred system in Australia, don't you? Just in case. It's always important to, especially when you're looking for the sorts of partnerships that lead to election commitments for the investment of significant sums of money for, say, facility development in an area where they get to cut a ribbon. It's good to get those from both sides. Yes, Steve, once again, it's always a pleasure to talk to you about these sorts of things and to build on our partnership of helping to solve basket case clubby type problems and make them into showcase clubs. So thank you for joining me again this week. And until next time, I look forward to creating and building wonderful networks and partnerships with all of our clubs.
Likewise. Thank you, and hope you're all enjoying our big old podcast.
Now, I did only say our little podcast because I thought that if I said that, we'd be able to keep it to less than, 48 minutes or something.
Oh, it was a time-based.
Yeah. Turns out I don't think we can. But I'm busy. We're having fun talking about this sort of stuff. So,
Absolutely.
There's value there.
Thank you, Mick. As always, enjoyable, and look forward to catching up next week.
See you then. Bye.
Ciao.